It's recording.
I'll just give people a few minutes to join and let me know when you want me to get started.
Yeah. I'll let you know. We have 6 participants and they will grow as 12:30 hits. At 12:30, we'll start recording. All right. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to welcome Dr. Leroy Long from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University at Daytona Beach, who will present on Black Unicorn STEM access for Black student athletes in non-revenue sports. I'll hand the Zoom to him to present. Thank you, Dr. Long.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate your attentiveness and your time. This is a project that I'm passionate about, and I do just want to start by giving kudos to my co-authors. So Dr. Sharnia Artis, she should be in attendance today as well. And then Dr. Morris Council. Dr. Morris Council is actually athletic rep at his institution, which is West Georgia. So I just want to give kudos to them. Also have a number of students who I can highlight after the presentation, but this is much bigger than me, so I just want to make sure I give a shout out to them as well. But thank you for being here. Right, so you may be wondering why I'm inspired to do this project. And so a few years ago, Verizon Wireless had a commercial in which they used prominent athletes from the highest level up. So LeBron James, Drew Brees, they even had a soccer player, model involved in the ad. But basically the point of the advertisement was to say that, we're one of the largest tech companies in the world at Verizon. And we see a need to get more students interested. And they're using athletes to say that although, I'm successful, I'm famous, I'm rich, I feel like more of you all need to focus on STEM than trying to become similar to me. So that was one thing that kind of got, my wheels turning with this. But something that Verizon mentions that's often overlooked is it's not just interest in STEM, but it's also resources. And so Verizon talks about not only, again, increasing interest, but providing real resources so that students can go into STEM. Additional motivation for me personally is I was fortunate enough to work with an NBA player from the Orlando Magic, Aaron Gordon. He actually has a coding camp in the Orlando area. I had an opportunity to work with that program due to his mother's leadership, and she has a background actually in tech, working with Intel. And so you can see that you have people like LeBron James, Drew Brees, who are promoting it from their athletic positions, but you have current athletes as well who have programs that are geared towards STEM. So they recognize that with their platforms, yes, students recognize them, but they should encourage them to go into STEM and not just try to become athletes. So that was something I just wanted to connect. Again, large tech companies, current athletes, and then lastly, going to the NCAA. And so people many times don't think about the NCAA as being the doorstep, front door, porch to the rest of the institution. If you watch any athletic events from the NCAA football, men's basketball, women's basketball, some of the more popular sports, you'll see they show the institution. They show you the engineering labs. And so students actually are getting an inside look at engineering through athletics. Right, so the overall purpose, again, just want to discuss access into STEM with a particular focus on engineering. We want to talk about non-revenue sports. Again, we constantly hear and see attention being paid to basketball, football, those big ones, but what about the non-revenue sports like soccer and lacrosse? And then specifically looking at Black student athletes who are majoring in STEM also. So I would say the biggest point that we need to think about in terms of previous literature is actually just a stat. And so US schools, began to desegregate, I guess, 60 or so years ago, but within the past 1 to 2, maybe even going back 3 generations, they began to resegregate. So we had desegregation taking place, for instance, in my grandparents' generation. And then during my parents' generation, right at the tail end into mine, schools started to desegregate. And today, many Black and white students attend schools that are more segregated than they were for their grandparents' generation. But the big issue is not just who they're attending school with, but the resources that are made available to them. And so the statistic or stat you'll see on the right side is that there's a $23 billion difference. And so we can't expect students to just aspire to go into STEM, if we're not giving them the resources to support them. So that's part of what I mean by access. But there are a number of successful programs. One is the Algebra Project that was an inspiration for this as well, but you can read about several others in the actual paper. Theoretical framework, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. We just want you to know we focus on critical race theory, basically because it talks about whiteness as property, it talks about privilege, things like segregation, and then college and career readiness theory, at least in analyzing our results, because we're trying to get students to be prepared to go into STEM at a later point in time. So major ways in which we looked at it. In terms of the actual research question and population, I was concerned with trying to determine how Black STEM student athletes' high school demographics and participation in varsity sports affected their access to pre-college STEM courses and clubs. So there were 6 participants who met the criteria of this study: Black student athletes majoring in STEM and playing a non-revenue sport. For this study, again, soccer or lacrosse. And so I'm mainly going to focus on stories or feedback in the form of narratives that we received from Dwight, so the first participant there on the list, and Azara, the third participant. So just giving you a moment in case you want to read about them, but mainly just going to focus on narratives or interview excerpts from Dwight and Azara from this one. And I'll talk about how their stories compare to the other participants. All right, so I always like to talk about my own positionality, just so you understand that although we present research, quantitative, qualitative, we pretend to be objective, we're all subjective. And so I'm originally from Dayton, Ohio. It is a city that has a racist history. It is segregated in terms of race and class. It is also the birthplace of aviation, so heavy STEM history and focus there. The Wright brothers, who invented aviation, are from Dayton, Ohio. So heavy STEM focus, but the access is not equal, not equitable in Dayton, Ohio. I grew up playing sports, probably the sport I was best in. I played the longest, baseball. And then I went to Dayton Public Schools. So I saw the access gap between the schools I attended, schools in the suburbs. And then I was a part of a summer enrichment program called Right Step. So a local university actually created, or at least realized, the interest I had in STEM, and then funded my way into higher education. So I went on to get 3 degrees, 2 in mechanical engineering, 1 in STEM or engineering education. But that's my background. I am also, I identify as a man. I am straight and married. And so I just want to also bring those factors into play. All right, so I'll start with Azara. So I mentioned I was going to focus on 2 of the participants. Azara mentions that she grew up in the Southeast, lower middle class. Also says her family is Black and Jamaican, so international family, but her neighbors were mainly white. And so when she first starts going to school, she has a unique experience. She's able to go to private schools, predominantly white, more affluent students. And then she switched to public schools with mostly Black students. And she talks about the actual benefits of that and how it was helpful for her. And then she talks about the courses she took in high school and how she took everything she had access to. So sometimes we think, again, is it students' ambition? Is it their interest? For Azara, it was access. So everything she had access to in terms of IB courses she took, but similar to me and my background, she didn't have access to dual enrollment. Right? She didn't have access to graphics or computer programming. And so maximize her access, her opportunity. Also, because her school wasn't very affluent, she only had access to certain types of sports. And so she played soccer because she didn't have access to lacrosse or swimming or more affluent sports. So she used sports as an access point, and she also used her IB curriculum as an access point. And so that's Azara's story, just to kind of shortly summarize it, or quickly summarize it. And then the second participant I'll focus on is Dwight. Also grew up in a majority white town, but a bit more affluent, so wealthy middle class neighborhood. He talks about starting STEM in middle school, but really he only joined STEM because of his older brother. He felt like the STEM programming was not interesting to him. And so that's something else I want us to think about. Are we, even within certain minoritized populations, within populations that deal with people of color, Black students, are we still encouraging them the same way we do our traditional engineers, rather than tapping into their unique interests, which could involve sports or could involve something with Black culture specifically? And so how is our STEM programming tailored to specific demographics? So that's the white experience. He did go to, again, a more affluent school. So although he played soccer because his brother played soccer, he had access to many more sports than Azara. And then if I go back just briefly to some of the other participants, You had Ryan. She is from the East Coast, was in middle to affluent, predominantly Black community. Same is true for Kenzie. So they had a similar experience. And so many more sports are available to them, even though they're going to predominantly Black schools since they're affluent. Larry, he was a part of a middle class kind of integrated community, had access to actually pre-engineering coursework. And then lastly, Noam, international student, had really no access to pre-college coursework, very limited access to sports, primarily just soccer and track. So you can see we're going across a spectrum of the Black experience, Black domestic students, Black international students from various types of backgrounds. So I know we really wanted to only take about 10 minutes to give the presentation. So I'll open it up to questions there. I'll leave it on the recommendation slide so you can start to read through it. But I want to be conscious of your time. I want to make this a discussion and not just a lecture, since I do believe in active learning, open engagement. So feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to answer them and start a conversation around this interesting topic.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Long, for a very interesting presentation on definitely a very valuable topic. I would encourage the audience to post questions in chat that I can then ask of the presenter, so we could get going. While we wait on a question, I thought I would ask you, what are the suggestions for a current student to manage the training time schedule that students in athletic programs are faced with the engineering schedule? So how does that affect? Is it time to graduation that can be adjusted, or what would you suggest?
So a number of things I would suggest is one, being transparent as a student athlete. So sometimes if I start with their own responsibility and their own agency, they withhold information. So they won't tell an engineering professor they're a student athlete because they don't want to be stereotyped. Or they won't tell their coach they're in STEM because they don't want the coach to try to encourage them to pursue a less rigorous major. So I would say just being transparent. And one thing that may embolden them in being transparent is finding advocates. So they could try to identify an advocate like myself, maybe a diversity, equity, inclusion officer who could serve as an advocate, their faculty athletic rep could serve as an advocate, just other people who would support them. And so then you make your coach aware, you make your engineering professors aware, and you try to get them to, provide as much, I don't want to say kind of wiggle room, because I think they have to be fair with the other students. But if there's a way to give an extension, if you're going to be out of town for an athletic game, or to give them a different lab schedule, or preferential access to scheduling because their lab schedule is more likely to conflict with their practices. And so those would be the major things I would say. And then to rely on other students for teamwork and for collaboration, going to office hours when appropriate. You could even use virtual settings like Zoom now, so it doesn't have to be physically on campus. But those would be some of my recommendations for current student athletes.
Mm-hmm. So we haven't got any questions. Again, I'd like to ask the audience to just type it in the chat option, which you're watching this presentation via, and I would be able to relay it to the presenter. We have 17 audience members, so it'd be great to get some questions going.
And I guess while we're waiting, I'll just offer an additional perspective. So we started by talking about the student athletes. I think if I were giving recommendations to coaches, I would say from the moment you first try to recruit, letting student athletes know that you're supportive of any major, any career they want to pursue. So that will also make them more likely to feel comfortable being transparent. So coaches from the beginning saying, you can come to my institution, you can major in any career field. And if they're coming from an institution similar to mine, so my institution, we're Division II, and we actually are STEM focused, making that obvious to them. We want people like you specifically. We want student athletes who major in STEM. If you're an engineering professor, you can make statements early on in the semester to say, regardless of your out of class obligations, regardless of your background, I plan to treat everyone equitably. I want everyone to succeed in my course. I will make the necessary accommodations for you to be successful. I'm not expecting the traditional mode of you being an 18-year-old coming straight from high school, having no other responsibilities, and only devoting, all of your hours and times to my course. So I think
Mm-hmm.
those are other things we can do. And even just evaluating our workload. Does every assignment we give students match a learning objective? And if you see it repeating across learning objectives, maybe you could reduce by a few assignments. So then there are less time demands on a student athlete or someone who's working full time or part time, or an ROTC student, a commuter, other students who have more limited time outside of class.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely very practical ideas. Uh, we have a question from Justin Major, and the question that's come up is, there is some discussion in higher ed that too many accommodations are made for athletic students already. Where does the boundary lie, and your opinion is appreciated?
So, in terms of too many accommodations being made for athletics as well, I mean, I don't want to start a separate tangent discussion about critiques of, the NCAA or large institutions like Ohio State, my alma mater, but recognize that we benefit a lot from student athletes, and they are providing actual labor and revenue to the institution. And not just that, but I mentioned visibility. And so there are many people in my home state of Ohio who know about Ohio State purely from the football team, the performance that they provide on the field. And so I would think, given all the benefits we get from those student athletes, we should be more than willing to make accommodations for them. And I think they are really just a visible model of accommodations we should make for all students, because we have to think that our institutions were designed, potentially 100, 150, 160 years ago. And who were they designed for? Not the current student. They were designed for, affluent white men who had no spouse, no children, no necessarily work responsibilities or obligations, weren't necessarily playing this high time intensive sport. And so I would just say, if we kind of align our values with the needs of society, companies like Verizon, others in industry, the needs of students and their families, I think it's more than acceptable and more than necessary.
Mhm. I mean, I take from that actually a perception which you actually referenced before with your ROTC comment, that you have an entire group of validated reasons that students would need flexible learning. So if you could put athletics together with ROTC, together with, somebody who's got a aging parent, some children. So there is a general need for accommodations that would be flexible, maybe through the Zoom mode that we're going through. Some more online options can come up. Personally, I will share that we have a biggest challenge with the reception from faculty has just been on academic integrity during the flexible offerings, unrelated to athletics, unrelated to the reason. It's just a general concern over academic integrity if I give a student flexible timing to do the test.
Yeah, we actually had that come up in my department, but because a lot of us have an engineering education background, we've really, in the same for our Center for Teaching and Learning, we've critiqued some of our assessment modes. And so if you're concerned about academic integrity, is it because you give too many exams? And maybe you need to reevaluate whether an exam is the best mode of assessment, because a student can still do an oral presentation virtually, student can do a course project virtually, they could do other forms of assessment that do not require an exam, where a student has to devote a set amount of time in this isolated, proctored, manner. And so maybe on our side and on the side of our centers for teaching and learning, we need to think about different assessment measures, and that could
Mhm.
reduce some of our concerns about academic integrity.
Hmm. I must tell you, you've just provided the cost option right there. Every university would love to have the athletics program pick up flexible learning, teaching, and grading requests. So that is fantastic. You've just given us you put the light in our tunnel. We have a question from Emily Napis Soran. To what extent do you think it's possible to integrate STEM learning into athletics and vice versa? She's thinking about the hands on learning that occurs through service learning and other applied projects. Can athletics be an opportunity for applied learning?
I definitely think so. I don't want to give too
Mhm.
much away because I have a pending grant right now with the National Science Foundation. I have some of those details in it. But there is curriculum that already links sports and STEM. Sports uses STEM. We just don't talk about it enough. There was a show on ESPN a number of years ago called The Science of Sports or Sports Science. And it actually went into physics, biomechanics, biomedical applications. And so they're already doing it. And if you have people like us who understand what they're doing, certainly you could go to even a kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school, gym class, recreational class. You go to after school sporting events and talk to them about what they're doing and certainly connect the two. So I think it's, a great path forward to get students interested and to just
Mhm.
make some of our STEM curriculum a bit more exciting and interesting.
Mhm. We had another question, actually, a comment about a good presentation. And it was how can engineering utilize sports to increase number of women and students from underrepresented ethnic racial groups to pursue engineering?
So one thing I'll just show my research team and give a shout out to them, but athletics actually has a more nationally representative population than engineering. And so you'll see a number of women are playing sports at levels that more so mirror the national population, where in STEM and engineering specifically, it's only, 25%. The same for Black students. Hispanic students is growing, but you see more effort potentially and opportunity there than you do in STEM or engineering. So I think, one, visibly who's going into it, but two, as I mentioned before, it being a marketing path, and so if you show the athletes and then you use that to show the engineering labs, and more so if you can show them doing both, then you can really connect to people as an access point. But it challenges stereotypes as well. Some people believe that women can't perform at the same level as men physically, but we're proving that wrong. Some people would say women can't perform at the same level intellectually as men. We're proving that wrong. The same for Black people. Stereotypes about athletic versus intellectual capabilities. We're proving that wrong in the lived actual experiences of these individuals. And so I think it's a great access point for different populations who traditionally have not been served by engineering or STEM holistically. So thank you for the question.
Well, that's all the questions. And again, encourage our attendees to ask questions. This was a very encouraging talk, something that I see very important to address. We've had extraordinary engineers graduate with athletic scholarships. So I think this is a pathway for many of us to encourage. So definitely, any questions, I would be happy to ask the speaker. And if not, you have any last thoughts on it, Dr. Long, before we close out the recording?
I was going to say I have additional information available. You can contact me one on one. You go to my website. There's a tab on there for my research team called EASE, Engineering, Arts, and Sports Engagement. And also follow me on social media. You'll see additional information coming out about some of this work. And hopefully, I am able to get funding for it because, similar to the students I mentioned, I can have an interest, but without the resources, it's difficult to push forward and make more of a positive impact. So, again, feel free to contact me, go to my website, or follow me on social media. But I look forward to connecting. If you're interested in this work, I would love to partner with you as well. Thank you again for your time and attention.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I will close the recording at this time. And